Hi everyone, this is Nitya Priya, and here also in this operating system class we see the interrupt structure and processing. And these are the contents of our class. We see interrupt first, then we see the types of interrupts, then we see the interrupt handling mechanism. Right, first what is interrupt? An interrupt is a communication between IO devices and CPU. You can see the last video that we have posted. We saw the communication between CPU and the IO processors or IO channels, right? Both are the same. So when CPU connects with the IO processors, it is by means of IO instructions. When the IO devices connect with CPU, it will be done by means of interrupts. So that is about an interrupt. So basically an interrupt is a communication between IO device and CPU. IO device to CPU is interrupt, right? So what is an interrupt? Firstly, what an interrupt is, or when an interrupt occurs, when an interrupt arises, what are the things that are happening? That is this. An interrupt is a response to asynchronous or exceptional event, right? Then an interrupt automatically saves the CPU's current status and allows it to restart. This is the second thing about an interrupt. And the interrupt causes an automatic transfer to a specified routine called interrupt handler. So immediately when the interrupt occurs, the CPU will just change its current status. It will just go and attend the interrupt with the help of the interrupt handler. So this is called interrupt, right? So this is the scenario of interrupt handling mechanism. See, I'll zoom it. See the program portion. You can see the sequence numbers. There are 1, 2 and 3. In 1, the program has started. The program has not yet been finished. In the middle, an interrupt occurs. Okay. So what is done? Immediately the control is transferred to the interrupt. Right. So an interrupt occurs and immediately number 1 stops. Then number 2, it starts. What is number 2? That's the interrupt. The interrupt is handled by interrupt routine. See it on the right side. It is an interrupt routine. So interrupt routine handles the interrupt. So interrupt processing starts. The interrupt is handled. Okay. So the interrupt is handled completely. The processing of interrupt is over. After this, then number 3 comes. Right. The program is finished. So the program has started. It is executed. In the middle, an interrupt is encountered. So CPU automatically changes its control to the interrupt handling routine. The interrupt is handled. Then after handling the interrupt, the program is resumed. So this is how the interrupt is handled. Right. Here we see the types of interrupts. Right. There are many types of interrupts. Here we see 5 types. The first type is IO interrupt. Right. There are various subtypes. Invalid IO command, IO channel, and when an invalid IO command is given, that is an IO interrupt. Then IO channel end. IO channel end is when there is no IO channel. When the IO channel is over, we encounter this interrupt. Then IO device end. There is no IO device, sufficient IO device. Then this IO interrupt will occur. Then the next type is program interrupt. Under that we have many subtypes: invalid CPU instruction, fixed point arithmetic overflow, storage protection violation, and all those things. Then number 3 is SVC, supervisor call interrupt. Supervisor is OS here, right? So supervisor call interrupt is number 3. Then number 4, external interrupt. Under that we have interval timer going off, operator interrupt, CPU to CPU communication interrupt. And number 5 is machine check interrupt. So these are the 5 main types of interrupts. Right. Now we see interrupt mechanism. Right. So when an interrupt occurs, what is done and how the interrupt is handled. So that is called as interrupt handling mechanism. When an interrupt occurs, the old CPU status would be stored as program status bird, and after the interrupt is handled, the new PSW will be initiated. That is the new CPU status. New PSW is new CPU status. That is initiated. this is the thing that happens when the interrupt is handled. So the processor is handling a process, an interrupt occurs. So the processor's current status will be saved with PSW, program status word. Then after the handling of interrupt, again the processor will resume its process with the new PSW, right? So that is happening in interrupt handling mechanism. And this is the scenario. See the entire scenario. On the left we have locations, right? So see number 1, number 2 and number 3, right? Number 1 is the program started, it is running. Okay, now an interrupt comes. So what is done? It comes to number 2. Where is number 2? It is on the bottom, see, right? So the interrupt is handled. So the program is executed in number 1, an interrupt comes. So immediately the control is transferred to number 2, which is in which the interrupt is handled. In number 3, the program is again resumed, right? So what happened? See number 2, when the interrupt is handled simultaneously, the new PSW is initiated, right? So before the interrupt comes, it was like old PSW, supervisor call old PSW, everything is old. And when the interrupt is handled, a new PSW is created, and with this new PSW, the program is loaded and restored. See on the left we have current PSW. Current PSW is the new PSW, and this is how the interrupt is handled. This is the entire mechanism of interrupt handling, right? And that's all about this class. In this class we saw what an interrupt is and what are the types of interrupts and how the interrupt can be handled. That is the interrupt handling mechanism. So what is done in interrupt, right? How about the stopping of the current instruction, how the resumption of the current program, all those things we saw in this class. So hope you understood the concept of interrupts, and thanks for watching.